The U.S. war in Afghanistan has been going on since 2001, longer than any war it has ever been in. After 20 years long, with almost as many lives lost in the 9/11 attack, costing over $800 billion, and the Taliban taking over more territories in Afghanistan, the question comes to beg, why is the United States suddenly leaving Afghanistan? You might be surprised as to why the U.S. would abandon its operations in Afghanistan when the Taliban, who were responsible for 9/11, are taking over more lands. That's because the Taliban was not behind 9/11 attack. Al-Qaeda was. Though these two names are interchangeably used, they're two different organizations. However, they were both formed from the same organization, who were born from the Soviet invasion into Afghanistan. To get full scope of what the United States is doing in Afghanistan, it helps to understand how the Taliban and Al-Qaeda came to be. After Soviet invasion of Afghanistan in 1979, fearing the secular atheist attack on the country, the Islamic clerics in Afghanistan and many parts of the world declared jihad on the Soviet invasion. In Arabic, a person involved in jihad is called a mujahid, and a group are called mujahideen. So there were thousands of these mujahideen fighting against the Soviet. And in the early 1980s, these fighters got new members that came from Saudi Arabia. Among them, a young wealthy engineer in his 20s named Osama bin Laden. These new members started bringing funding for the organization. The U.S., also at Cold War with Soviet, started funding them and Pakistan. Fearing a Soviet invasion also gave huge amounts of wealth to them. And within a few years, the Soviets were pushed out of Afghanistan. Soon after the Soviets' withdrawal, Afghanistan plunged into civil war, and the Mujahideen fighters turned warlords started fighting amongst themselves for control. Among this chaos, one of the Mujahideen, named Muhammad Omar, having lost interest in what the Mujahideen had become, went back to his village and started teaching religious curriculum there. Fueled by anger by the state of Afghanistan, he formed an armed group with the students. Students in the local language of Pashto being Taliban. Soon, more and more students joined, and recruits started pouring in from refugee camps who were displaced by the chaos. These students, or Talibans, began marching to cities and villages, promising justice and freedom from the warlords. They began to get much support, including from anti-communist politicians. Soon they overthrew the government, and from 1996 to 2001, the Taliban controlled Afghanistan. In the same time, when the Soviets left, the Mujahideen, with no direct enemy to fight, two members, the young engineer Osama and his friend Abdullah Azam, along with other members, formed a new group with international aim and decided to make Afghanistan their base. Base in Arabic being Al-Qaeda. Their agendas aligned on one thing: to run Afghanistan under Islamic law. The Taliban and Al-Qaeda founders are also close friends. Due to this, the Taliban, who ran the country, began to fund and aid Al-Qaeda. Al-Qaeda was also angered by the U.S. presence near the two most holiest sites in Islam, during the Iraq invasion of Kuwait in 1996, declared war on the U.S. Soon after Al-Qaeda started orchestrating attacks on the U.S. in 1998, Al-Qaeda carried out attacks on U.S. Embassy in Kenya and Tanzania, killing 224 people. They attempted more attacks on the U.S., but with little success. But in September 2001, Al-Qaeda would pull off their most successful attack on the U.S. The U.S. now started to see Al-Qaeda as a real threat.
We believe that a plane has crashed into the World Trade Center in New York. That happened within the last few moments. No details at this stage.
The U.S. asked the Taliban government of Afghanistan to hand over Osama bin Laden. The Taliban government refused, claiming they needed evidence that Osama bin Laden was behind the attack. A month later, the U.S. declared war on Afghanistan.
The United States military has begun strikes against Al-Qaeda terrorist training camps and military installations of the Taliban regime in Afghanistan.
Afghanistan would prove to be greatly difficult for the United States to navigate. Nicknamed as the Graveyard of Empires, its terrain is desert with high mountains, making any ground employment difficult. Many of the Taliban's and al-Qaeda members began fleeing to Pakistan, including Osama bin Laden. From here, the two groups began working together, orchestrating attacks on the U.S. After deadly years, the U.S. finally managed to achieve their first objective.
To the American people and to the world, that the United States has conducted an operation that killed Osama bin Laden, the leader of al-Qaeda.
But soon after, al-Qaeda elected a new president, Ayman al-Zawahiri. The U.S. next objective was destabilize al-Qaeda network system and to retake Taliban lands. After another decade of fighting, al-Qaeda began to lose power and funding and started to lose new recruits as another organization was growing in the West. The Taliban was proving to be more difficult for the U.S. and the Afghan government. With billions being spent every year and many Afghan and Western deaths, it was becoming clear that the Taliban weren't going to be eliminated by military intervention.
It will take more than a single budget to get where we need to be.
In 2018, the Afghan government offered the Taliban recognition as a legal political party and the release of the Taliban prisoners if they stopped the attacks. Soon after, talks between the U.S. and the Taliban began for a peace agreement. With months of back and forth, finally, in the 29th of February 2020, the U.S. and Taliban signed a peace deal. The U.S. will withdraw from Afghanistan and Taliban prisoners would be freed. In exchange, the Taliban pledged to prevent al-Qaeda from operating in areas under Taliban control. Months later, the U.S. president finally announced on April 13, 2021, that the U.S. would leave Afghanistan.
That all U.S. forces would be out of Afghanistan by May 1, 2021.
The Taliban was never an international threat to the U.S. directly. The Taliban main focus was Afghanistan. But al-Qaeda, with the 9/11 mastermind dead and no longer having a base, the U.S. had no longer interest in spending billions and staying there. The U.S. Secretary of State, when asked, said, "The fact of the matter is this. We went to Afghanistan 20 years ago with one mission in mind, and that was deal with the people that attacked us on 9/11. That mission has been successful." With the U.S. and foreign troops withdrawal, in the eyes of Taliban supporters, the Taliban have claimed victory and freedom for Afghanistan from foreign rulers. But many experts are fearing that Afghanistan may end up in a similar state as when the Soviets left, a fracture and fighting within the Taliban. You probably have noticed there wasn't any advertising from YouTube. I won't ever monetize this channel as I don't support certain ads YouTube shows. In the future, we will find our own partner. If you liked this video and you want us to cover certain topics in an unbiased way, I set up a Patreon account where you can support me and this channel. I have cool stuff there. I'll be posting a vote for the next video's topic. I'll also be starting a live Q&A session weekly. Probably when the channel gets bigger, I'll make it monthly, but in the meantime, link is in the description. Go over there and support.